suspending immigration for at least 60 days, US President Donald Trump says he'll sign an executive order on the issue. And he promises to help New York get the supplies it needs to fight COVID-19. We're going to be getting the latest from our Washington correspondent, Ketevan Gorjestani, in this edition. Brazil's Supreme Court wants to investigate a protest against lockdown measures in the country. President Jair Bolsonaro was part of the demonstration that called on the army to intervene and control the response to COVID-19 there. And clearer skies and less pollution for this, the 50th edition of Earth Day. But while lockdown measures may have reduced traffic, scientists are worried about the long-term impact of this new virus on climate change. Hello and a very warm welcome to you. I'm Eve Irvine. Glad you could join us. While temporarily suspending immigration to the United States, planning to sign an executive order on the issue this Wednesday, Donald Trump says the measure will only apply to those seeking permanent residence and not to temporary workers. The US president also promised to help the state of New York when it comes to vital supplies and tests for the new virus. The US has just recorded its deadliest day in the fight against COVID-19, with 2,700 people dying from the infection in the last 24 hours there.
Millions of Americans sacrificed their jobs in order to battle the virus and save the lives of our fellow citizens. We have a solemn duty to ensure these unemployed Americans regain their jobs and their livelihoods. Therefore, in order to protect American workers, I will be issuing a temporary suspension of immigration into the United States. This pause will be in effect for 60 days, after which the need for any extension or modification will be evaluated by myself and a group of people based on economic conditions at the time.
To get the very latest on it all, we can cross to our Washington correspondent, Ketevan Gorjestani. Ketevan, immigration roughly had all but halted, had it not during this crisis anyway. Tell us, how big an impact is this latest news from Donald Trump going to have?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, immigration has pretty much stopped altogether as things stand. You don't have any refugee resettlements. You don't have any citizenship ceremonies, and visa offices across the world have been shut down. So really, there's not much happening, and there is not much detail coming out yet because, again, with multiple policies with Donald Trump, it's basically first a tweet and then the administration scrambling to get the details out, and that's what they're doing right now, actually, with Donald Trump saying that we should be getting some of the actual wording of this executive order this Wednesday. What he did say was that a mention of 60 days, so it's going to be for a 60-day period, and the idea is basically to limit the permanent immigration and allow temporary immigration, temporary working immigration. That means, for example, seasonal farm workers will still be able to come to the United States. Meanwhile, people who are in the process of getting a green card or a visa to come work in the United States, those are going to be put on a pause. And that's really the idea behind the executive order. Donald Trump repeated it multiple times. He wants to defend and to protect the American worker after millions of people have recently lost their jobs due to this coronavirus outbreak and the ensuing lockdown.
Indeed. Meanwhile, Ketevan, Trump has been meeting with the governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo. What came out of that meeting?
Well, what came out was that it was a positive meeting, and that was the real question that everyone wanted to figure out, because those two have been really battling ever since the outbreak. It's been hot and cold in their relationship, but this time it was pretty good because Donald Trump, in the briefing that came after that meeting with Andrew Cuomo, he praised the New York governor, saying that it was terrific to work with Cuomo and with the teams in New York. Andrew Cuomo coming out of that meeting saying it ends the whole back and forth and finger pointing in a very fair and smart way. So the two men basically agreed on one thing that was very important for Andrew Cuomo and for all governors in the U.S., the question of testing. Andrew Cuomo had said it multiple times. Yes, the governors should lead on testing, but they need the help of the federal government. And that's apparently what he obtained from the president, that the federal government will will help with at least getting the supplies from abroad so that the governors can then practice and put out those tests in their state on their own and on their own terms. One thing that the New York governor did not obtain and was disappointed about was the fact that in the stimulus package that was just passed by the Senate, there was no mention of federal aid to the states to make up for the shortfall from the lockdown. Donald Trump said that he had heard his issue and that this would likely come in the next stimulus bill.
Okay, Kedevan for now. Thanks indeed. Kedevan Gorgistani there, our Washington correspondent. Well, meanwhile, for a seventh straight day, the number of patients with COVID-19 requiring hospitalisation has decreased slightly here in France. Still in the high numbers, however, 30,000 in hospital, 5,000 of them currently in intensive care. Well, France entered lockdown on the 17th of March and is now planning to ease some confinement measures next month, with children being brought back to school in reduced class sizes. No cafes or cultural activities allowed, though, as yet. Well, while France does look at gradually lifting some of the restrictions, for some of its citizens, getting home in a world that rapidly reduced travel became a serious challenge. Mari Schuster reports.
March 13th, 8 o'clock. Philippine police patrol the island of Palawan to signal curfew. Tourists are nervous. The Philippines have given them only 2 days to leave the country before complete lockdown.
Les aéroports étaient bondés. Beaucoup de gens, ils ont attendu, ils ont essayé de prendre des vols commerciaux qui sont flashés dans les prix. Beaucoup de vols s'étaient supprimés. Donc d'avoir le vol dans la direction où tu souhaites, c'était pas sûr. On avait des contacts avec des gens qui sont partis à Manille, mais ils restaient une nuit dans la rue, sans l'eau, sans rien.
Back in Palawan, Christophe and his fellow travelers chose to stay and wait for their government to bring them home. These Europeans were in daily contact with their embassies, but they were surprised to find out the lack of cooperation between their countries.
J'ai trouvé ça un peu étonnant pour l'Europe, qu'ils n'ont pas s'organisé ensemble. C'était vraiment chacun pour soi. Et même dans le rapatriement, chaque avion était séparé, même le rapatriement des îles, c'était chaque nation s'organisait en fait soi-même.
Christophe waited 4 weeks before receiving an email confirming his flight back to Paris. In the Philippines, he was given a mask, his temperature was taken every 2 hours, and he had to go through decontamination, only to discover the lack of sanitary precautions once arrived in Charles de Gaulle Airport.
Premier contact, forcément, c'est le douanier derrière dans sa cabine. Et on a vu sans masque, sans gants. Puis on vient des Philippines où c'était vraiment très strict, et on vient ici en France où on dit on est peut-être plus civilisé ou plus organisé, mais c'était complètement le contraire.
Christophe had to pay 300 euros for his repatriation. He feels lucky. Other tourists are still stranded abroad. Some have been asked for thousands of euros by their government to buy their tickets back home.
The Supreme Court in Brazil is calling for an investigation into a rally against confinement measures held outside the army headquarters at the weekend. President Jair Bolsonaro was one of the participants in that protest, which called for the army, in fact, to intervene in the country's response to COVID-19. Despite the judicial objection, some demonstrators are still on the streets. From Brazil, Anna Kaiser brings us the latest.
In recent weeks in Brazil, there have been several small protests calling for military intervention and to dissolve Congress and the Supreme Court. They're calling for actions similar to what happened in a 1964 military coup, which led to over 20 years of dictatorship. These calls were repeated today in Rio de Janeiro in front of the regional military headquarters.
Como ex-militar que sou também, eu sou favorável a entrar lá e exterminar aqueles vermes do Congresso, inclusive o STF. Chegar lá, por mim, eu pendurava eles aqui em praça pública. Seria uma ditadura, seria uma coisa, mas temporariamente.
O governador do Rio está fazendo o povo ficar em casa e não está indo trabalhar. Por quê? Todos querem trabalhar. Se nós estamos aqui, podemos trabalhar. Deixa só as pessoas vulneráveis, as pessoas de idade, em casa. Agora o povo quer trabalhar, senão vai morrer de fome.
President Jair Bolsonaro, a former army captain and admirer of the dictatorship, joined the protesters over the weekend and said he supported them. But Bolsonaro has since moderated his tone. He said that democratic institutions are not at risk. But at the same press conference, he caused controversy when he claimed,
Eu sou realmente a Constituição.
Brazil's military leaders deny there's any risk of a military coup. At the same time, they're defending the president, who they say is being attacked by Congress and the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, our team of France 24 reporters were chased out of this protest. While we were working, an angry mob started yelling at us and pushed members of our team. It was a worrying sign for press freedom in Brazil.
Uma euforia aí, o pessoal gritando fora a Globo, mas era a TV francesa. E isso aí pode acabar, né? Acaba manchando pouco, porque acaba sendo uma violência desnecessária.
But this group of Bolsonaro supporters have called for more protests against democratic institutions for next Sunday.
3 soldiers were involved in the massacre of at least 13 civilians in Cameroon back in February. The presidency there admitting now that some members of the army did in fact act with militants on an attack on an Anglophone region in the west of the country. Authorities had so far denied this claim. English-speaking separatists have been fighting the armed forces for the past 2 years there. Well, meanwhile, this Wednesday marks Earth Day, a date set to demonstrate support for the protection of the environment, one that usually is marked in over 190 countries across the globe. This year, of course, the fight against COVID-19 will take precedent and to some extent the focus off climate change. Many scientists worry that even when the immediate health worries recede, governments and economies badly battered will have other priorities. Having said that, as our environment editor Mairead Dundas reports, lockdown around the world has led to at least short-term gains.
Clearer skies, but a darker world. That's the sobering assessment from scientists on this 50th anniversary. Of course, coming at a time when transport has ground to a halt and energy demand is at record lows. We do know that COVID-19 is set to cause an historic drop in emissions, more so than during any economic crisis or wartime period of the past. If we take a look at this graph here, we can see the CO2 curve before the crisis, with temperature rise on track for a 3-degree jump, if not more. That's compared to the scenario under lockdown conditions, with a predicted fall of 5.5% compared to last year, bringing that curve a whole lot closer to the ideal trajectory if we want to keep global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Now, emissions aside, confinement is also leading to clearer skies, be it in major cities such as New York, Paris or Delhi. And in fact, Indians are breathing their cleanest air in decades, with Delhi, the world's most polluted capital, recording a rare good rating in the level of dangerous PM 2.5 particles. Now, April 22nd is normally a day when demonstrators flood the streets, but today all action will be digital, perhaps leaving more room for images like this, be it jackals in central Tel Aviv or a kangaroo in the middle of Adelaide. The lockdown is allowing our animal friends to reclaim what was certainly once their habitat, yet another reminder of the human footprint on the planet.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for this edition. Back with more updates in 15 minutes' time. Do see you then.